Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, your podcast to help you and your family cruise a little smarter. And I'd like to welcome back to the show all the way down in, where are you, Kentucky, Chris?
Ohio?
Nashville,
outside
Tennessee.
Of Nashville, yeah. I have not moved. Do not worry. I am still a Californian at heart, but we're visiting some family here in Nashville. So I'm currently in, what is this, Steve? You know time zone. Central time zone?
Central time zone. And for the first time in forever, a little frozen there, we have three of you in Central time zones, and I am still hanging out of the Pacific. But let's just jump into the show. You know, Chris, Disney has how many ships sailing right now?
Well, right now they have 3 ships sailing, or you want to know how many would be sailing in a theoretical world, right? Okay, I guess Fantasy doesn't start sailing till next month.
Correct.
Okay, so right now there are 2 ships sailing.
There is the Disney Dream and the Disney Magic. The Disney Wonder is on our way to the Panama Canal. She's going to come over to the West Coast, and we're going to be able to jump on it, hopefully. Beyond that, Disney has announced there's another ship coming. Do you know which that one is?
Of course, the Disney Wish, followed by the Believe and the Imagination.
But there's another ship coming. There's another ship coming that a lot of people aren't really, focusing on. I think that it's out there, but I think that we can put it in the same kind of genre as Disney Cruise Line. And which would be, Chris?
Actually, I should have rehearsed this in a mirror, because is it the Halcyon, the Halcyon? I don't know. So one of our guests is going to have to give me some pronunciation here. But yes, the Galactic Starship Cruiser, in association with Galaxy's Edge, is currently being constructed.
It is. And, we were talking on a previous episode, and two of our Patreon supporters were kind of, texting us as we're kind of going along and everything like that. And I was like, hey, this might be a fun episode to do. So let's bring in our 2 guests today. One of the amazing hosts from Podcast Stardust. I'd like to welcome to the show today, Dennis from Texas. How are you doing today, Dennis?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. And also up in Wisconsin, coming back to our show as well. How are you doing today, Chad?
Really, really good. Excited to talk about this.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a fun topic. And Dennis, let's just jump into it. Why don't you correct Chris and explain to him what ship is coming to Disney World?
Well, Chris, you get the gold star for pronunciation. It is, in fact, the Halcyon. This is a name that has been used in Star Wars for the old continuity and the new continuity for a lot of different things. There were Jedi that went by that last name. There have been other ships called the Halcyon. None of them really have any fame in Star Wars. They're just kind of offshoots. And then it was even the name of a planet in a novel by James Luceno called Tarkin. And a bunch of law enforcement officials got sent there to handle some things. But it already has been mentioned in Galaxy's Edge, even though the ship is not available to the public yet. If you go to August Cantina, and I'm taking the internet's word for this because I have not had an opportunity to go there myself, you can find a note on the wall advertising the position for a mechanic, and all interested persons should contact Captain Kevin of the Halcyon. So that is the ship, and that is the steps they've taken so far to integrate it into Galaxy's Edge.
I love the fact that they put so much detail into some of the experiences, and that's generally in my little world, it goes over my head and I miss most of it. But for those who are very invested in the different story modes throughout the lands that Disney has created, I love that they put all these different things into it. Well, before we continue on with that in and of itself, Dennis, I'd love for you to talk about kind of your Star Wars fandom and how you started your podcast.
Star Wars is actually the first movie I ever saw in a theater. My dad took me when I was 3. He loves to tell everyone how I fell asleep in the middle of it. Then it was probably also my 3rd, 4th, and 5th movie they got to see in theaters. And it's just something that I've always had growing up and been a fan of. Have been going to the last couple Star Wars celebrations. And then I had a friend reach out to me a number of years ago and asked to start a podcast, the predecessor to Podcast Stardust, called Starship Sabers and Scoundrels. Due to conflicting schedules, that podcast came to an end. But then my other host, Jay, and I started a new show called Podcast Stardust. We just released our 300th episode, and now we are looking forward to our 2nd anniversary here in a couple of weeks. And it covers everything from the movies, what's on Disney Plus, the comics, the books, and then general news and other discussions.
So let me go back there. 300 episodes, and you're coming up on your second anniversary, and we're like over 5 with somewhere around 240 or something like that in our show, Chris.
Yeah, I thought we were doing great, but we're not as diligent as you, Dennis.
Well, when we started, there was actually 2 shows on. There was Stars Resistance and the Mandalorian had begun. So that gave us a lot of content to get through. So we had a lot of velocity there at the beginning. And then we just found that if we tried to put together, because we have one episode devoted to the news every week. And then as soon as you add anything to that, the show turns into 2 hours. And so we broke it up into 3 episodes and just record once a week. And it's been fun. It's our weekly appointment to talk Star Wars.
I mean, it's also a testament to that franchise that there is that much going on in the Star Wars franchise. And it has so many branches and pathways that lead away from the core 9 films.
So Chad, also for you, kind of talk about your Star Wars background, how you got into it and kind of what it means to you.
Yeah, I don't have nearly the Star Wars street cred that Dennis has got. As a fan of the films growing up, clearly, I don't know if, which the first one that I saw in the movies was. I was similar to Dennis. I was really young when the first one came out. I think I was 2. Empire Strikes Back came out when I was 5, and then 8 for Return of the Jedi. For Return of the Jedi, I vividly remember seeing in the theaters. But it was something that always really stuck with me. Just the overall, just how fun those films are, just the overall sort of just fantastic worlds building and characters, and just the overall story of the good versus evil and things like that sort of resonates with kids and stuff, because it makes it very, very easy to sort of follow along with and understand. And then as I got older, I'm certainly, I think it was one of the first DVD sets that I bought, or VHS sets that I bought when I was at college. And then going to see the 1, 2, and 3 when they first came out. And then, being able to now share some of this stuff with my kids as they're growing up, with the new ones, with 7, 8, and 9, it sort of spanned a lot of family moments for me. So I think that's maybe the part that I like the most is that, I can talk it with my parents because they were kind of in that space. I could talk it with my kids, friends. There's a lot of, it spanned a big section of my life that I've been able to latch on to sort of different pieces of it for different reasons.
I think that's a huge part about Star Wars. And Dennis, you are probably the guru in the room of the 4 of us talking right now. But definitely correct me if I'm wrong. But I think that's a huge part of the Star Wars story, is the fact that, from what I've kind of taken away, is like, I've got my Star Wars, which is the original 3, but then there was the follow-on 3, and the last 3 I've watched my youngest son, who has really latched onto it, and he loves your podcast, Dennis. He listens to, especially with the Bad Batch lately, all the episodes he's been listening to those, but he's got kind of his Star Wars journey that's kind of been going on as well. And so I think that, like Star Wars as a series, as I'm trying to find the right word for it, is just, something that no matter what your age, as you jump into it, it becomes kind of part of your story as well. So today we're going to talk about the Halcyon and kind of our opinions. But I think the fun thing about it is these are just our opinions. But as far as who you, our listeners, may be, as far as your Star Wars journey, and especially like kind of living them, as you're talking about with your kids as well, Chad, I think it's a fun thing to do as well. And I know, Dennis, you've been doing that with your kids as well.
Oh yeah. My boys got interested in Star Wars with the Clone Wars, and I got an opportunity to take them up to Star Wars Celebration in Chicago a couple of years ago, and it's just turned into a family affair. Fridays have been scheduled around whether it's been The Mandalorian or the last season of the Clone Wars or Bad Batch recently. We just been a fantastic way to get the family all involved in the same thing.
Well, let's kind of move through it. We are going to talk about the Halcyon, which is kind of Disney's latest iteration. And as Chris and I were talking about at the very beginning, it's sort of kind of a cruise experience, at least as far as how they're kind of marketing it to start with. And it is to be determined how that's going to work out. But as you're talking about, Dennis, there is references of it at Oga's Cantina. You want to continue with kind of like the background of what the ship, the Halcyon, is, or where it came from and how it fits in the Star Wars universe?
Sure. So the Halcyon's backstory is that it is a ship that's been constructed by the Chandrilla shipyards in the Star Wars galaxy, and it's got an appearance very similar to the ship that Princess Leia is on at the beginning of the original Star Wars, A New Hope. Only it's bigger, it's got more cabins. The idea is that it is a luxury liner that will be allowing guests to come from their homeworlds via a shuttle or a pod, dock on the Halcyon, and then take an excursion to Galaxy's Edge. It's going to be populated with all kinds of aliens from around the galaxy. This Captain Keevan that I mentioned earlier is a Pantoran. If that doesn't ring a bell to you, think of the cameo appearance, if you ever caught it, by George Lucas in Revenge of the Sith. And he was a blue-skinned alien standing outside the Opera Hall. This is that same type of a character. These characters also showed up frequently in the Clone Wars and in the Bad Batch. They are trying to work it into the story of Galaxy's Edge by setting it during the sequel trilogy. There's been strong hints that the likes of Chewbacca, Rey, and Kylo Ren will possibly be interacting and showing up on the ship from time to time. You'll have to be looking out for the First Order and possibly doing some work for the Resistance while you're there.
I imagined it like that yacht from Solo. I'm trying to think of Dryden Voss or something like that had this like space yacht in Solo that I think was probably not as large as this ship will be, but it did seem like space luxury. And like the point of it was to like travel the world in style. So that's what I was picturing in my head. But it's interesting to think of it as that initial ship that Princess Leia was on, because I hadn't really connected it in my brain to that.
Yeah, I think they went that route because it is such an iconic image from the original Star Wars that people recognize, because that's how the film starts, with that thing flying right overhead with a Star Destroyer in pursuit. Then again, it showed up at the end of Rogue One, which is a more recent film. So it just has some recognizability that I think even the more casual Star Wars fan that may have only seen a couple of the movies is going to recognize.
So Dennis, if people want to do a little bit more deep dive into the Halcyon and some of the, maybe this backstory behind it, where else can they find some information?
Well, your best bet is to get familiar with Batuu and Black Spire Outpost, because they really haven't given us a lot of information on the Halcyon yet, other than what they've told us about the experience, and we'll be covering here later. But a couple books I would recommend: Black Spire, which is an adult fiction novel set in the Star Wars universe by Delilah S. Dawson. It tells the story of how Vi Moradi, who you can meet at Black Spire, got there. And then there's Crash of Fate by Zoraida Cordova, which is a young adult novel, and it's about some teens that are trying to make their way there on Black Spire Outpost. One of my favorites is the Galaxy's Edge comic, which was a limited series written by Ethan Sachs, and it features Doc Ondar. It's kind of an anthology type of story, telling 5 different stories with different characters as they're doing things in Galaxy's Edge. And then if you're just interested in Galaxy's Edge in general, I recommend The Art of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge by Amy Ratcliffe. There's a lot of current concept art. Just be careful if you haven't been there. There are some spoilery type things in there, and there's plenty of surprises, as far as I know, in Galaxy's Edge that you may want to wait till you get there.
So have you guys met Vi Moradi? Did I say that right? Have you met her? Have you seen her in Galaxy's Edge?
I have not met her. I haven't actually been there. My 2 trips got canceled by COVID, but I've seen plenty of pictures of people with her.
Okay, Chris, do you know who she is?
I do, because I've read, this is how bad I am. I've read the book about Vi Moradi, but I still can't remember what it's called. You just said the name of it.
Black Spire.
Black Spire. I read that because, as you all will famously remember, when Star Wars Land, or Batuu, opened, it was a partial land without an entire attraction. And I was like, I want to know more about this land and what it will be. So I read that book. And yeah, Vi Moradi runs around, and you can still meet her to this day in both Disneyland and Walt Disney World. She's fun. And the person who's very close friends with her has like a whole backstory and a ton of history on the character. And it's one of those things where I think when the Imagineers created, and let's be real, this is one of the controversial things about Galaxy's Edge, which is that it is not a place that you can find in Star Wars canon until they made it part of Star Wars canon. So it's not something that you really heard a lot about or knew a lot about. They wanted to create something that was like its own experience, and they weren't going to take you to Endor. They weren't going to take you to even one of the locations from the new films. They were going to create something separate. So they also created these characters with their own backstories. And I actually think that that ties in really well to the topic of today, because truthfully, this is like its own little backstory. And I think had they not gotten so much negative feedback about it, we may have seen less of Rey and less of Kylo and less of Chewie up on the ship. But I bet you now they're like, who can we put on this ship? What characters can we flood this with? Because we really, really maybe made a mistake, or maybe did something that the fans were not super thrilled with by creating a land that was so separate from the locations and places we already knew. And Dennis, you may be able to tell me, actually it was canon, but my belief is that it wasn't canon as a part of the original Star Wars stories until they built it and the Imagineers started including it in different things, right?
Right. The closest it came to being canon was in Solo, a Star Wars movie. One of the droids mentions you couldn't get to Black Spire Outpost with me, to Lando. And that was the first canon mention of it. And then all this other material came out. But just as an aside, and I won't take up much time, I know one of the reasons why they picked a new environment is that, and it's same with this cruiser, is they want fans to experience their own story. And that was hard for them to do if they picked Endor, if they picked Hoth or Tatooine or something like that, because those stories are so embedded in somebody else's adventure, whether it's Luke getting out of the cantina and Han blasting out of the spaceport in A New Hope, or where exactly would you go on Endor besides a hut with a bunch of Ewoks and things like that. It was hard to pick one single environment out of the movies that could successfully hold someone's adventure and let you have your own story. And so that's kind of why they've gone with something new. And it may not have been the best choice, but I can't wait to get there.
Chad, you've been there. What's your experience?
It's really immersive. I think, some of the things that I like most about it is just the environment of it. So you sort of feel this hum throughout the whole space of engines going, and then you'll hear craft like shooting out overhead and stuff like that. So it's almost like, hey, things are getting ready to take off, or there's like this low hum of the whole place around there. I think it's really well themed. I think it's immersive to the point where you start to look around and hear little beeps and sounds and things like that. That's the piece I think that hits me the most. It's a little bit awkward the way that they've got it set up. And I think I didn't really understand it as well until I started reading the Black Spire novel that Dennis was talking about, because you sort of have your First Order area that's sort of like where Kylo Ren and the First Order troopers and stuff will hang out. And then you've got your sort of resistance base area that Vi Moradi and stuff was basically setting up. But the neat part is that it's not just sort of the space and the land, it's all the vendors and stuff like that are in there. You'll have, if you go and grab a Coke from, one of the little stands with little ball Cokes and stuff like that, they'll say, hey, make sure you're watching out. There's the First Orders around here. And so it's immersive to the point where you've got a lot of the cast and stuff like that aren't necessarily even actors, but they're all playing a role within the area. And I think that's going to be tremendously exciting when we start talking about what's going to happen when you come off and you do your shore excursion to Batuu coming off of the Halcyon, because all of that is going to really tie together really well.
Well, that's kind of a good transition point to kind of go into what we're going to experience, or at least what they've kind of put out there. And I kind of look at it as the Wish came out, they've got the 1923 restaurant. Is 1923? Am I saying the right year? The 1923 restaurant. And they also have the Marceline Marketplace, which, for people that are Disney fans and like the history of it, and if you're a Star Wars fan and kind of know the backstory of it, you can get a lot more out of it. Versus, if you just know Frozen, you go to the Frozen restaurant and see the experience beyond that. But going to 1923, and I think that what they're going to do with that, with some of the pictures and some of the backstory of where, who Walt Disney was and where the company came from, I think that's going to speak a lot to people that have got that kind of backstory in them. So let's kind of turn to what Disney has put out as far as what your experience is going to be. And Chad, why don't you run with that as far as like what they've announced?
The ship itself, or the hotel ship, let's call it the ship, is small. So relative to what you would get on, say, a Disney Cruise Line ship, or even any of the resorts and stuff at Walt Disney World, very, very small. So they're talking about 100 rooms. I think I think they've said 100, and maybe you're somewhere in and around 100, but it's just a small number of rooms with 3 different cabin types that you're going to have on there. The very top level one is going to be sort of this grand captain suite, which will sleep up to about 8 passengers, 2 queen beds, 2 berths, 2 wall pull down beds, an integrated seating area where basically you can sit around and play games or look out the windows, things like that. You've got a double vanity bathroom with a second bathroom with a single vanity. There's a bar area that's located in there. And then I mentioned the sort of the windows that you can look out. They've actually got each of the cabins have windows that will actually stare out into space. So very immersive to the point where your windows within each of your rooms are not going to be looking out to a courtyard or anything like that. It's literally you are in space, and this is what you're looking out against. I have to imagine they're going to do something similar to what they had done on the Dream class ships, with sort of those magic portholes where you're going to have sort of other ships and stuff that are going to be sort of going by. Wouldn't surprise me to see, the Millennium Falcon going by, certainly X-Wing fighters, Y-Wings, things like that. So it's going to be totally immersive with that. They'll also have an integrated seating area. And then they also mentioned a few Star Wars surprises. So with these upper cabin classes, they're being very coy about what that's sort of going to be. But bigger rooms and sort of nicer accommodations are going to bring more surprises with it. Sort of a step down from that, they've got another cabin class that's called your Galaxy class suite. This one is 4 passengers with a queen bed and then 2 wall pull-down beds with an integrated seating area, 2 windows into space with this particular cabin class, a double vanity bathroom, a bar area, and then again some more Star Wars surprises. And then the vast majority of the cabins that you'll have on there will be these standard cabins, which can sleep up to 5 passengers, queen bed, 2 berths, so bunk beds, which it does mention that those are suitable for adults. So it isn't necessarily just for children. It does say that specifically in the on the website that adults can sleep in there, as well as a wall pull down bed that is suitable for adults as well. So you could sleep up to 5 adults in the standard cabin. With 1 window and out in space and then a pull-out table. That sort of wraps up. I have to imagine, similar to the ships, you're probably going to have a couple of those grand captain suites, similar to how you'd get the Walt or the Roy suites on the ships. Your Galaxy class suites are probably more like a concierge or 1-bedroom kind of things that you would have, with the vast majority, let's call it 3/4. They haven't announced sort of what that mix looks like. But the vast majority of those cabins will wind up being those standard cabins. Has anybody heard anything differently as far as like the mix or anything?
Nope, that sounds about exactly right. It's interesting because Disney has not been slow to utilize this window into space technology. They have a new restaurant opening this month, sometime really soon. It's opening, it was supposed to open a long time ago, but then, the pandemic. So there's this restaurant called Space 220 that utilizes this sort of like window out into space. And then Rise the Resistance utilizes this technology as well. If you pay attention while you're on Rise of Resistance, as you're moving through the ship, there are times when you can see out into space, and it's like that. And so they're now putting 1, 2, or 3 in every single one of their rooms. You could expect to see those windows on the bridge, probably, maybe even in the dining hall. What's kind of eerie about this hotel is that it doesn't have any real windows, like windows out into Florida, which obviously you wouldn't want that. It ruins the illusion. But can y'all just take a moment to think about what it would be like to check into a hotel that was like, this hotel has no windows and there's no natural light. So it's an interesting concept because those outdoor windows views into space have to be real good to keep folks from being super claustrophobic in an experience like this, I imagine.
So when you said that, no windows and no doors, and it's up to you to find your way out, right?
To find your way out. Yeah.
Dennis, you've been on a lot of Disney cruises. What are your thoughts, kind of looking at the concept art of the different venues or the different rooms that they have? How do you kind of compare them to what you've experienced on Disney Cruise Line? Or what are your thoughts of what they've come up with so far?
I think the rooms sound fantastic. I like the idea of having a suite where you can get together with maybe some extended family and hang out. You can gaze out the window and see a planet passing by, or perhaps a passing starship. I'm anticipating as you get close to Batuu for that first full day, when you're getting ready to have a port excursion, so to speak, you'll be able to see the planet come into view from your window and the like. I like that idea. As Chris is pointing out, I am thinking about the experience, whether it's the hyperspace lounge on the Wish that they've been previewing, or kind of like the Skyline experience that we've seen in the bars there on the Dream and the Fantasy, that you'll get these really fantastic views that will really sell the immersion. Yeah, it's going to be a little crazy that you're not going to have any natural sunlight coming into this building at all. But I think this experience will kind of make you forget about that. And that may be a contributing factor to why these experiences are only 2 nights. I don't know how many people could really go too much longer with that. I mean, I guess you do get to go out into the park one day, but still, I don't think this is something people could do for too long without it becoming an issue.
It's almost like being sort of on a submarine for a couple of days, where you're underwater and you are where you are for a couple of days. You're totally immersed.
So there's a couple more other areas that they talk about as well, Chad. You want to cover those as well before we talk about the experience that they put out there, at least initially?
Yeah. So some of the other spaces that you can find that at least they've published about, I imagine there's probably still some more to come. They've talked a lot about the bridge and some bridge training that I think Chris will probably tell us a little bit about here in a bit. But you can actually visit the bridge of the ship, see out, over through the expanse of the ship. So, certainly you'll get those little windows and stuff in your cabin, but a much more expansive view of the overall space in from the bridge, as well as some activities that'll take place in there. There's also the Sublight Lounge. So it talks about, a place to sort of stop and get a drink and, perhaps meet a scoundrel or two or things like that, play some sabacc. So the most famous from Solo, A Star Wars Story, where Han Solo actually won the Millennium Falcon from Lando Calrissian. One of the other spaces is the obviously that you'll spend a lot of time in. I think it'll play a large role with the story overall, is the Crown and Corellia dining room. By day, sort of for breakfast and lunch, it seems like it's going to be more of a casual sort of place to sort of eat and drink. But in the evening, it's much more of a sort of fanciful sit down meal, a multi-course thing with dining entertainment and things like that. We've seen Disney Cruise Line, head this direction with sort of these dinner shows. I think this is going to be sort of even the next level of that. You see some of what they've announced with Disney Wish, with sort of this action sort of dinner kind of theater stuff like that going on with the World of Marvel dining room that they're going to have on the Wish. I think this is going to be very similar in a lot of ways, where there's going to be things going on around you and activity, and there's going to be a lot of things going on within that space. They've also talked about there's sort of an atrium that you kind of come into that people will sort of have interactions. Perhaps you might meet someone who gives you a mission, things like that within those spaces. And then I saw a note, something else about an engineering room, but I'm not familiar with that. Does anyone else have any notes about that?
Well, the engineering room has kind of come up in the scope of this idea that you'll have adventures and these story moments, which we'll discuss more in the context of your experience later. But it seems like a place that you'll potentially be going to do something as part of a mission, as part of the story that you might be pursuing, whether you're working on behalf of yourself, the Resistance, the First Order, something like that.
To go back to the Crown of Corellia, can you give some context as to, is that a specific place, or is that just something that's on the Halcyon itself, or is there some story behind that?
Well, Corellia is a world in Star Wars. It is Han Solo's homeworld, as a matter of fact, and we got to see quite a bit of it in Solo, A Star Wars Story. The old Legends universe, that they aren't really following the stories anymore. There used to be a king of Corellia, and there was a big deal about the crown and who's going to be king. And so this is just a way of creating some elegance, I think, and giving you an idea of what's going to be there. It's kind of hard to describe. I mean, the only time we got to see Corellia officially in anything, it's a planet that's been overrun by the Empire. It's dark, it's dirty, it's been polluted by with all the industry that's going on. So it's not the most luxurious of places. We got to see Han Solo go into the sewers there. And so it's an interesting choice.
The Millennium Falcon is a Corellian freighter too, isn't it?
That is correct.
Some neat tie-ins there.
But we're talking about food, which, I love to talk about food. I'm super interested in what they're going to do. because another thing that Disney in general fans, not necessarily Star Wars fans, but just Disney fans in general have not been like super thrilled with is the food offerings in Galaxy's Edge. I feel like I haven't heard people be like, this is amazing. The highest reviewed food item in Galaxy's Edge is a Ronto wrap, which is like a tasty sausage, like pita bread type thing, right? And the breakfast there, even better. But I personally have not eaten a single thing in Galaxy's Edge where I was like, I want to get that again. I'm not trying to like shade it. I'm just saying they have like fried chicken. They call it fried tip yip or something like that. But it just isn't very tasty. Like, it's not the best seasoning. It's not very crispy and crunchy the way you would want chicken to be. So it's not that great. My curiosity with this is you're creating an upscale restaurant. You're calling it the Crown of Corellia. You're having a 3-course meal, and you're including it in a very large price tag experience. People are going to want a lot out of this food. One thing I've noticed that they serve is blue shrimp, which makes me immediately think of one of the best episodes of season 1, Mandalorian. I think it's one of the best episodes, partially because it was directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, and I love her. If you'll remember, they're farming blue shrimp. That is one of the things that they're serving. It's like dyed blue. It has to be. I've never seen this in nature. So I don't know how they're achieving the blueness of the shrimp, but they're serving that. So clearly they're taking inspiration from parts of the universe they've expanded on. But I'm curious what you all think about a 3-course, probably prefix type menu set in a Star Wars world. Does it excite you? Does it make you feel a little anxious like me? What are you thinking?
Well, we got a lot of glamour shots in the behind the scenes video that the Imagineers put out there. I was pretty excited about it. I know there's a difference between food prep for fast service, counter service in the park, and what you would expect if you're sitting down. I know a lot of people have varying opinions about the food that you get in the 3 main dining rooms on a cruise ship. I know, Chris, you've called it wedding food.
Nice famously. Wedding food, but yes.
Yeah, in the past. But this looks like next level stuff. It looks like they've been extremely creative for it. I think they're going for experience as much as they are going for taste. I remember those Imagineers talking about theming a dish after Mustafar, which is, of course, the lava planet where Darth Vader was crispified, so to speak. And so using inspiration, they've got desserts that look like the logo for the ship. One of the most fun things I've heard about Galaxy's Edge is, of course, the beverages at Oga's Cantina, again, for the experience as much for the taste. And so I think that is what you had to look forward to while you're there in the Crown of Corellia, is maybe the experience of having something that looks a little bit different. It's probably going to be pretty tasty. And then you're going to have some out of this world entertainment at the same time.
The food looks gorgeous. It looks exotic. I also know that my personal family are not necessarily adventurous eaters. So I worry about when I take my family on there, are they going to be able to sort of find things that they're going to like? Because they'll typically gravitate towards the chicken or the beef or the things like that, right? Or my kids will gravitate towards chicken fingers. Will they call it Tandoorian something? Who knows? Like, right. So I imagine that they'll have options on there for less exotic palates. But the stuff that they have shown in some of the teaser videos and the photos and stuff that are on the website, it's gorgeous looking.
Just as fun to look at.
Yeah, the presentation and stuff like that. And it's probably amazing. I'll certainly dig in. Chris, I think the same thing about a lot of the food in Galaxy's Edge. My kids at the time were trying to find something to eat. They actually went over to get Pizza Rizzo instead over by the Muppet stuff, because they couldn't find it
outside of the planet of Batuu.
which I will say, there is a miss going on between the Muppets area and the Star Wars area to not have some sort of, at least a pigs in space sort of at least a poster, like in that little walkway. There should be something there.
You heard it here first, folks.
The Ronto wraps, you're right, that got a ton of really hot press as far as being something great, and I was so excited to try it. And then
you didn't love it.
Didn't love it at all. I've heard the breakfast ones are really good. Maybe I'll try that next time. And I never made it to Docking Bay 7, so I didn't get a chance to try their food, which is sort of where they seem to publicize for the shore excursion that you can go eat.
Included.
Yes, it's included, as Christy would say. But I agree that the food to me has been underwhelming so far. But I'm certainly willing to give it a try, knowing that this is such a premium experience that you would expect there to be some sort of a premium on the food that would be served in a Chronic Regalia dining room.
Well, speaking of those experiences, Chris, why don't we run with that next? As far as we don't have to go because we don't really know for sure that they've published definitely kind of a timeline of what people can expect during what may or may not be their experience on the Halcyon. But why don't you kind of run through some of the experiences that they've shown so far?
Yeah, so on their landing page on the Disney World website, they have a sample itinerary. The sample itinerary is what I can only imagine a possible version of your day would look like. I think they're just trying to give you like, this is what it might be like, not a you have to do all of these things or it has to be in this order. And of course, it couldn't be in this order for every guest or else people wouldn't be able to get it done. So in the sample itinerary, on day one, they have you arriving at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, launching in a launch pod. So remember, the storyline is that you are leaving whatever planet you're on, Earth, I guess, and flying up to the ship. They've created I guess we could call it a ride. I think for those of you who have been on Rise of the Resistance, I think it is probably most similar to the escape ship that leaves Batuu. So if you've been on that, you'll know that it's not the sort of thing where you have to strap in and like get ready for a ride, but it is immersive and it feels sort of like you're flying up into space. So you'll launch into space. Then it's funny because if you're as fans of Disney Cruise Line, they've got a couple of things on here. They have a ship orientation. They have light refreshments, but the thing I thought was hilarious is they have a half hour dedicated to the muster drill. And it makes you wonder, like, what's the muster drill on a land-based hotel? But I'm sure there'll be some storytelling happening there. So I'm excited to see what that's like. They also have sabacc lessons. So I think they want you to learn how to play this game that has been made famous. Then on the first day, they'll have a captain's reception. They'll have a dinner featuring live music. And then after dinner, they have something called the Outer Rim Regalia, which is probably some sort of like, actually, I don't even want to pretend to know what that is. Dennis, can you think of what that would be referencing?
Yeah, I've heard description of a fashion show and possibly some sort of a formal event. Yeah.
Okay. And I bet so they're encouraging you to come dressed in your Star Trek finest, Star Wars finest. Before the show, we were talking about how likely it might be that one day someone arrives in a Star Trek outfit instead of Star Wars. But Disney on the website is letting you know that you can purchase your Star Wars outfits ahead of time on shopdisney.com. So they really want people to dress up. But then here's the interesting thing. They have a portion in the itinerary that's labeled as an unexpected story moment. And this is where they want everybody's experience to be slightly different. And the way that they've talked about this in the materials for it are things like, will you help someone smuggle some luggage onto the ship? Or will you help an engineer, with a problem in the engineer room? Things like that. So these unexpected story moments will probably take place for people who choose to have them. You probably don't have to have this. But if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, will you help me with something? And you say yes, you get to do that thing. And it's experience just for you. And not everybody on the ship will do that thing. Now, this is something that's super obscure unless you've done it. In New York City, there's this thing called Sleep No More. And it's a 3-hour theatrical immersion experience where you literally just walk around a 6 or 7-story building for 3 hours and you choose your own story. I don't even know what they're doing with it during the pandemic, but it reminds me of that, where you walk through the space, you choose your story, you do what you want to do. And if you choose to follow a character or you choose to get pulled into a storyline, you'll do it. And then they have special atrium entertainment, bridge training, and that wraps up day one. So let's pause there so I can breathe. What do y'all think of the day one itinerary? Anything surprising? What do you think?
I think it's interesting. They crammed an awful lot into that itinerary, but I think it's largely so that to give you an idea of the scope of things you can do. I can't imagine anyone sitting down and playing Sabacc for only 30 minutes. That's seems to be a little bit more of an involved type of a moment there. They've also suggested that with some of these unexpected story moments that you might expect some trouble on the ship, that perhaps the First Order is not particularly excited about the Halcyon being nearby. So they may be pulling an inspection, and then there's opportunities for conflict there that could get everybody wrapped up into a bigger story. These stories that you engage in may spill over into the rest of your trip, whether it's your port excursion to Batuu, or you may have a related story moment or two or three the following day during your visit.
This is going to be sort of everything sort of building into a crescendo kind of thing throughout your 2 days there. And to me, day one is largely sort of setting the table, establishing what the stories are, establishing direction, allowing you your sort of, they've talked about sort of the ability to sort of choose, are you going to help the First Order? Are you going to help the Resistance? Things like that. So sort of setting that table with, all right, which way are people going to go? And then starting to figure out on day two, now you really start putting those stories into action and things like that. So I think that day one is largely sort of setting the table for what is this all about? How does all this work? Because realistically, nothing really starts until 4 o'clock. Because I think I saw boarding is from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. And then, your muster drill and stuff like that. There's dinner involved in there. Yeah, I don't think they're going to probably go much later than about 10 p.m. and things like that. So there's about 6 hours to really establish all of this and sort of get people grounded in it. And I think that's really largely what day one is about, is sort of just at least getting people grounded.
I think you guys have hit on something that kind of in my mind today as I was thinking about it before we got ready to do this podcast, is like, I think that the initial kind of thought is like, okay, we all go into this room and a story moment happens and we all just kind of experience it together. But as you guys are talking about, I think there's a real possibility, and what excites me about it is the fact that and when I went back and looked at what kind of Disney put on their website, is like, you can kind of create your own story. So it's not necessarily all of us going into, like in a Disney cruise line, we're all going on excursion 12 and follow, the Mickey hand with number 12 or whatever, and we're all going to go see Barcelona or whatever that excursion happens to be today. But I think that as the evening goes along, as you have these interactions, I think that's what excites me, is the ability to kind of create your own story as you kind of go through it. And it's not necessarily like this whole group experience all doing the exact same thing,
which is more fun. Though it's not a small lift. Like, to be clear, if you want everyone to be able to leave the ship saying, I had a personal experience and I did my own adventure, and you're taking 100 cabins, multiplying that by at least double occupancy, but more than that, I would guess probably 300 to 400 guests in the hotel at any given time, maybe more. That's a lot of people to give a good, unique experience to. And so you have to think that Disney is going to do their best to make these achievable bite-sized adventures that they can, that you could do within 20, 30 minutes, so that it doesn't overtake your entire itinerary, not just for you, but also so that they can do it as many times as possible and it still feels organic. So yeah, I would echo everything you all are saying. So let's get to day two. Day two, you're up bright and early, 7 a.m. for breakfast. You have a transport shuttle to the planet of Batuu. Something that I want everyone to know about the planet of Batuu is that it is the same day every day in Batuu, story-wise. So there is no such thing as the next day. The story resets every day on that planet, right? Because the ride Rise of the Resistance has a very direct timeline that meets and fits in with the storyline of the land. Unlike Avengers Campus, which basically has taken a multiverse approach to like, who's going to be here? I don't know. Whatever we want to do, we'll do it. And that's just a very different vibe than what they chose to do here on Batuu. So you're living that day on Batuu, and it is that day, that the Resistance needs you. And also Hondo might hire you to go do something on the Millennium Falcon. And that's what's going to happen. So they have that listed. Once you take the special transport, and this is important to note. It is different transport to get from the ship to Batuu than the transport that you used to get from Earth. I don't know what the storyline there is to the ship. So what we think this is going to be like is basically like really tricked out buses. And the buses will look very, very, very different than a bus, but they are basically buses. And if you know anything about where this hotel is geographically, it's directly behind MGM Studio or Hollywood Studios, sorry. And you will be in this bus that looks like a spaceship, and it will pull up to the back of Batuu. And when you get out of the bus, you will be on the planet of Batuu. It is up to you to choose not to walk out of those tunnels outside of Batuu and ruin your illusion. But if you stay in the planet boundaries of Batuu, you would have basically your whole morning in the immersive daytime story of that planet. So you would ride Rise of the Resistance and hopefully save some folks. You would work with Hondo, and then it says that they will add story moments to the planet for hotel guests. So these are things that you haven't been able to do up until now in Batuu, but that you will get to do if you are a hotel guest, which I think is pretty cool. You'll have lunch, you'll fly back up to the ship, and this they have all happening before 1 p.m. So I think their idea is like, do what you got to do on the planet, experience all that cool stuff, but then get back to the ship because we got a lot of cool stuff on the ship that we want you to see. The coolest thing that I'm most excited about, I know Dennis and Chad and Steve are excited about, is the lightsaber training. They have created sort of like a dojo experience where you will hold a lightsaber. They've even previewed a new lightsaber technology where the blade comes out of the hilt. It extends out of the hilt itself, which is really cool. And you will basically learn how to use a lightsaber by fighting little lasers that are getting shot at you from like a dojo master or a little robot in the dojo. Super cool experience. And that's available for everybody on the ship. At some point, you will have a slot to go do your training. They have droid racing competitions. You can build a model ship if you want to do that. You could go to a sabacc tournament. You could have cocktails at the Sublight Lounge. For dinner, they've labeled it something called Taste Around the Galaxy. So think of it as like a different menu than you had the night before, maybe a more expansive menu. Maybe this is the menu with the blue shrimp. I don't know. Story moments. And then this is the really interesting thing. The evening ends with what they're calling a finale. So what I interpret that to be is all the storylines of all the 2 days are building to chaos. And then I think chaos will happen for like an hour, and there'll be all these storylines, and maybe everybody will be, whatever they learned in the muster drill will have them all come to one location or certain locations around the ship where they will experience the finale of a story. I'm assuming things will work out in their favor because everyone needs to get some sleep. And you wake up the next morning, have breakfast, fly off the planet, and go home. So that is the overall experience that they are pitching. What are your thoughts on that, everybody?
I think it sounds fantastic. I like the options that you get. I like that in the Imagineering video about this, they made clear that this is an ideal experience for the person that loves Star Wars, but the people that love Star Wars are probably going to have a good time too. And so, as you were suggesting, you can ignore some of these things. If you just want to sit there in the Sublight Lounge and enjoy the bubbling fizzy drinks that do all kinds of fantastic things, that's perfectly fine. It leads me to believe that if you want to play more sabacc all day, that's going to work for you as well. If you just want to explore the ship, you can do that. But they really are committed to giving you your own adventure, and you'll have plenty of ways to integrate your trip to Batuu into your time on the Halcyon.
I think one of the really interesting things that I took from that Imagineering discussion was how when they developed Galaxy's Edge, they were working with the folks that were working on the Galactic Star Cruiser. So the mythology and the story fits together with what they're trying to do. As someone who's been through the land, and I mentioned, how it was a little bit disjointed. When the land opened up, Rise of Resistance was not open. It was the only thing that was open at the time was Smuggler's Run. So maybe they're disjointed from that standpoint because it feels like they're two very different experiences. Different things are going on within those things. But what I think is going to be really neat and unique with the Galactic Star Cruiser is they've got an overall story that's going to merge all of this into one overarching tale that's going on. So you're going to have a piece of your story is going to be about going and finding this resistance base and trying to, basically as a new recruit. Another piece of this is going to be the smuggling story that's going on with Hondo and stuff and over with the Millennium Falcon. And they're going to merge all of this. And, one of the things that struck me walking around the land, and this could be totally for facade or whatever, but there were a lot of sort of like doorways that weren't being used and then like stairways that would go places. And I wonder, Chris, you talked about, that this is really going to sort of open up pieces of Batuu and pieces of the land that previously weren't necessarily open. I wonder if some of that then becomes open for some of the guests of the Galactic Star Cruiser, where it's like, hey, you've got to go and you've got to go to this door because you're going to smuggle this into the land. You got to go deliver it over here to this door, knock 3 times, or, secret handshake or whatever it's going to be. Maybe you get one of those cool little eyeball things that comes out of the door and they're looking at you like they had in Jabba's palace. But I think the neatest part of all of this is how all of this is really going to sort of meld together as one cohesive story across not only the Halcyon, but then the experiences that you're going to do and with things that we already know in Galaxy's Edge.
I've got a wonky view on this whole thing as you guys are talking about it, as you kind of put that out there, Chris. What I think is pretty neat is all of us, I think at some point in our life have had a group type experience. And I think the one kind of product that Disney puts out that you really hear it time and time again is Adventures by Disney, where you have this small group of people that experience something together and they form these bonds. And I think they've got an opportunity to do that with this adventure as well. A little bit bigger than a normal Adventures by Disney grouping, but kind of similar to maybe one of their river cruises. There is something that I think that all of us, whether it's Boy Scouts or sports camps, and I've got a pretty good experience when I was in the military, when I went through resistance training, as far as like working together with a group and kind of going through this experience together. And as you come out of it at the end, if they do it right, it really builds a kind of a poignant moment in your time in your life. And maybe I'm overselling it a little bit by saying that, but I think they really have an opportunity to do that with this, with the Halcyon. So if they do it right, and I think they've got the ability to do that, I think this could blow a lot of people's socks off when they go through it.
Not to be the bearer of bad news, but it kind of has to blow people's socks off because it is so expensive. It is not a very affordable experience. I know that both Chad and Dennis have crunched some numbers and compared the experience to DCL a bit for us. So I'm curious to see what that might look like.
So this is going to be a premium experience. And certainly I worry a little bit. They're obviously having to set the bar really high to be able to deliver against all this stuff. So for 2 guests in a regular cabin, now this is specifically from August 20th to September 17th, which you have to consider is probably low season for this experience. For two guests in a cabin, it's $48.09 for your 2 days. So $12.09 per guest per night. For 3 guests in a cabin, this is pricing for 2 adults and 1 child. It's $52.99 for the voyage, a bargain of $8.89 per guest per night. For 4 guests in a cabin, which is 3 adults and 1 child, it's just shy of $6,000. So $5,999 at the low price of $749 per person per night. Obviously really, really pricey. So what's included with that, with those prices? You get certainly your voyage on the ship. It's your meals are included, entertainment. Similar to DCL, there's the alcoholic and premium drinks are not included. The shore excursion to Batuu, which also includes a day at Hollywood Studios. It does mention in there that it's not just Galaxy's Edge that you could see. You could also go to other parts of Disney's Hollywood Studios. Although I find that really strange that you're going to go down to Batuu and then somehow end up eating lunch at Andy's Lunchbox or something. That seems a little weird to me, to go hang out with Slinky Dog while you're on Batuu, but maybe some people want to do that. With all of that, when you look at, how does that compare to what you would get on DCL? I looked at an upcoming sailing on Disney Wonder, which is also a 2-night voyage. This one's actually coming up. It's a different time of year, obviously, with this being off-season pricing for the Galactic Star Cruiser. The Wonder voyage that I looked at is actually hitting right around spring break. So it's actually on March 18th of 2022 in a Category 4A, which I figured is somewhat similar to what you've got with the cabins on the Star Cruiser, because you've got the ability to sleep 5 in there. For 3 adults and 1 child was $3,374.40. So that's about 56%, if I did the math right, of what it would cost to go on the Galactic Star Cruiser. So it considerably less expensive. Now, it's obviously a very different experience, but just to get a sense of, Disney Cruise Line generally gets the rep of being a more expensive cruise line relative to some of its peers. And this is, the Galactic Star Cruiser will be even further beyond that. I also looked at a 2022 fantasy sailing in, I think this was late February into early March, Star Wars Day at Sea cruise, knowing, hey, if you're looking for a different sort of Star Wars experience, what would that look like? Again, in a 4A cabin, 3 adults, 1 child. The price was $8,646. Now that's over 7 nights versus 2. So it's 40% more expensive. But when you sort of gauge that on a sort of a per night cost, the Halcyon being at $6,000 for those 4 folks, that's $3,000 a night. If you break down the fantasy one, it's $1,235 per night. So less than half on a per night basis for what you would get on the fantasy. Now, Star Wars Day at Sea on a fantasy cruise is 1 day. You get 1 day of actually Star Wars things going on and stuff like that. I think technically it probably starts the night before if it's similar to the Marvel one. Chris, I know you've sailed on that, so you could probably speak to this. But certainly going to be a different level of immersion on the Halcyon versus what you would get on the fantasy.
Oh, 100%. The Star Wars Day at Sea cruise is 5%, 10% immersion, maybe. There is a storyline about the First Order taking over the ship, right? But it is loose. It is a loose storyline. They have a moment the day before and sort of a finale with fireworks. So let's call it 10%. The rest of it is like, you like Star Wars, look at this thing. And it's just that. It's nowhere near the level of immersion. But if you are even a tepid Star Wars fan, and if you're anything but a diehard, I don't really see this experience appealing. But Dennis, I know you did some research too. So what are your thoughts and what are your comparisons looking like?
So what I did was concentrate less on a Star Wars experience and more on a Disney experience. And I came up with a couple different options. I'm only going to highlight really 2. I tried to stick with that same pricing period, August 20th to September 17th of next year. I found if you were just interested in doing a Disney experience, you could go down to Walt Disney World, get yourself a room at Port Orleans Riverside, 2 queen beds, 8 days of park admission with a park hopper and memory maker, and that's going to come to $5,095. And that's for my family, which would be 3 adults and 1 child under this pricing. Of course, there's no food in that, no souvenirs. But again, as Chad was bringing up, when you look at the price per day, I think you're coming out ahead. The other option I looked at was a cruise. And this one, again, in that same time period, I found a 7-night Western Caribbean cruise from Port Canaveral on the Disney Fantasy. This is a veranda stateroom. It's going to be inclusive. It's going to include the lodging, your food, and your entertainment. So it's kind of more of an apples to apples comparison, except for the immersion factor. And that came to $5,950. Or if you wanted to give yourself a little bit more spending money, you could go to an ocean view room for $5,670. So again, same time period that we're getting the pricing here for the Halcyon. Halcyon's definitely a bucket list item for me, but I've got a family that I don't know how many more vacations I'm going to get that I can guarantee all 4 of us will be there. For my dollar, I think I'd want in this next year to probably spend it on that 7-night cruise or a 7-night Walt Disney World vacation, and then put the Halcyon for a special occasion at some other time when I know I'm going to have other opportunities.
So obviously I've priced it out as well, not to the level of research as you all, but just as what is the cost of this and what would we be able to do? As our listeners know, Seth and I are going on a Disney Wish cruise next summer. We can't miss the inaugural sailing season on the Wish when we host a podcast about Disney Cruise Line. So that is a high priority for us. looking at this type of experience, what I actually see it being most feasible as is if a group of you and your other Star Wars friends said, we're just gonna like rough it up and spend the night all in the same room and, you know, do that experience. Because it's hard for me to think that every family is like Dennis's family, where everyone sort of creates relationships and memories around Star Wars. I think there are some families like that. But, you know, like Christy, for example, was like, hey, do you want to take Dave? Because I have no desire to see this, right? There are going to be a lot of people who are just like, this isn't my jam. But I could see you being like, hey, I'm going to get together with 4 of my friends or 3 of my friends, and we're going to make it the cheapest per night rate possible. And then, you know, draw straws about who has to sleep in the bunk beds and just figure it out. But I could see this being a situation where it's not always a family thing. And if anything, it ends up being groups of friends or people who are like, yeah, we love Star Wars, so we're going to do it. So I don't know, maybe some families, maybe some mix. But I think if we were going to do it realistically, we would probably try to find some other people who are big Star Wars fans and say like, let's share a room. Because we're certainly not, you know, we're also foster parents. I'm not going to like spend that money to bring a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old on this ship. Like, what are they going to do? So that's sort of where my head's at. I don't know.
You bring up a good point there. I was thinking about this as I was looking into things. This doesn't strike me as that it's really for kids. Maybe it's just my perspective or whatever. But as I look at some of the things that are in here and the complexities that are involved and the sort of logistics of moving between lands and all this overarching, it feels like it's really geared more towards adults. In the same way that I think a lot of what, frankly, Galaxy's Edge feels very geared towards adults, Oga's Cantina and just some of the overall experiences and stuff that are going there. But you're right. It feels like it's for most families to spend this when, you know, you may have a spouse that maybe isn't super into it, or some of your kids are just not as into it. It's hard. It's a hard number to swallow.
I think you're right, Chad. I think maybe it depends upon your kid. My youngest son, Alex, is a huge Star Wars fan. He's just like over the top. He knows, you know, all the different worlds, the different characters and everything like that. And he's pretty, you know, travel savvy. So I think that, you know, for him, he would love it. But I think to your point, maybe, you know, if you're just bringing your average, you know, kids to it, maybe it might not be something that you want to do. So I think this has been a really good discussion. I think it's to be determined yet to see what comes of it, because we don't really know what the experiences are going to be like. I think the sticker shock I think that hit all of us kind of going, wow, that's a lot more than we thought it was going to be. But I think the story's still out or the jury's still out as far as what this experience is going to be like, and whether, you know, maybe we want to do it with our families, or as Chris was saying, you know, maybe we work it together with a bunch of friends and go experience it there. So I think we'll probably leave it at that. But before we leave it at that, I'd like to go kind of around our kind of group one more time and get everybody kind of a final thought as far as Disney, you know, coming up with this concept, putting it into action, and having it be an experience that we're going to be able to do. And why don't we just start with you, Chris? What do you think?
I mean, I haven't done it yet, but my gut is saying more of this, please. Like, I don't need it to be Star Wars, but stuff like this is cool. It's cutting edge. No one else is doing it. Let's have these types of experiences replicated. I know that this is a big gamble for them. They don't know what it's like. But listen, you have the cruise industry. You have Disney Cruise Line. You could build experiences like this into your cruise ships if you want to. And I think it's a really interesting use case to see, like, how does this pan out for future ships, future ideas, as they try to be more and more innovative. So I'm a fan. It's pretty easy to be like, oh, that's way expensive, and what are they thinking? But let's just put the price aside and say, it sounds amazing. Obviously, I want to do it. Obviously, I would be like thrilled to get to go and do an experience like that. I just was hoping not to sell my other kidney to do that.
I'm really excited about this. The pricing is what it is. It's, you know, chances we usually sail off season. We're probably going to do this off season too, because just to try and make it a little bit more affordable. Like Chris mentioned, it's a big gamble for Disney, and I think there's some of the other folks down the road at Universal are probably watching this really, really closely about the possibility to do something like this with Harry Potter. Every time I bring this up with somebody who's a big Harry Potter fan, they're all in to be able to, they'll spend whatever they need to spend to go spend a night at Hogwarts and have the sort of magical dining room and all the stuff that goes on there. It's really unique. It's something that I think is going to be worth it in the end. I know there's been a lot of speculation about pricing, about, hey, what will this look like in 2 years? And would Disney start running deals on it or things like that? But I don't know. I've never really seen Disney sort of back off on pricing in the past. It seems like if anything, it just goes up. So it seems like this is something that you really want to do. It's going to be one of those things that you're probably going to need to sort of take the pricing for what it is and spend the money. And I think they're going to deliver an amazing experience.
And I guess I'll leave the final words to you, Dennis, because you run an amazing podcast, about the Star Wars universe. This is, the Star Wars universe coming to life for a lot of people. What are your final thoughts on this?
Oh, it looks amazing. Like I said, it's on my bucket list of things to do. I really wish it had just come out a couple of years ago. It would have been a better time in my life. I've got most of 2 years of trips backed up into 2022 due to COVID. And so I don't know where I'm going to be able to fit this in. I have a family full of Star Wars and science fiction fans, and this would be something that the four of us could do and would have an absolutely fantastic time. I just don't know when it's going to be possible to do it. I could find friends to go and do it as well. But for the first time, I really want to go with my wife. I really want to go with my boys. And with one getting ready to go out of college and the other one getting ready to start high school, trying to find that timing is just going to be a challenge. So I cannot wait to hear trip reports about this. I kind of had the opposite concern that Chris and Chad did. To me, it looked like some of the early stuff that it might actually be geared towards younger fans. And I wasn't sure that I would enjoy it as much. But having heard what you've all said about Galaxy's Edge, I can see where there might be a concern on the opposite end. Yeah, live your own Star Wars adventure. What could be better than that?
Well, I guess we'll kind of leave it with that. Everybody knows where they can find Chris and I. We're generally just babbling about nothing on our DCL podcast. Well, I won't put it that way. So sorry, Chris.
You should definitely keep that in. That is a perfect way to describe what we do.
But I really want to thank you, Chad, for your support of our podcast over the years. And thanks for coming on and jumping in and talking about this. But I'll leave it with Dennis. I know that you've got an amazing podcast for people who are Star Wars fans. If you've not listened to your podcast, where can people connect with you? And
go to your podcatcher of choice, look up Podcast Stardust. It's 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And usually there's a news episode, a review episode, and some other type of discussion. We're on all the social media at Podcast Stardust, and usually there's links there to help you find the show.
Well, once again, thank you guys so much for coming on and talking about this. I'm excited the fact that they have another ship. And granted, maybe this ship isn't necessarily sitting on the water, but I think the fact that it is providing experiences for people to kind of live a different adventure, as you guys have all said, I think it's neat for Disney to push those boundaries and see where they can take it. So I'm excited to see the Halcyon take air here in 2022. And hopefully one of us will be on one of those initial voyages. And Dennis, I guess I'll just ask you this question. Is that something that you thought about with your podcast as far as bringing somebody on that has experienced this to talk to them about it?
I've got listeners. We talked about this briefly with the pricing a few weeks ago, and I've had people reach out and say, this is perfect for my family. We're going to do it. So I am hoping once it's out there and we've had people that have done it, that to bring somebody on so they can tell us about the experience.
Perfect. Well, I guess as we get out of here again, thank you guys so much for coming on and bringing this episode out to everybody on our show. And I want to wish you guys all the best as the end of the summer ends. And any final thoughts before we get out of here tonight, Chris?
No, thanks for listening. This is definitely in our wheelhouse, contrary to Christy's belief, because this is a cruise ship. It's just a space cruise ship. So hopefully you DCL fans went on this journey with us. Don't worry, we'll be back to our regular programming next week.
Well, thanks again, Chad. Thank you so much, Dennis. Thanks, Chris. And we'll see you next time on the DC Podcast. Goodbye, everybody. Well, that's going to wrap up our show today. Once again, I really want to thank Dennis and Chad for joining Chris and I to talk about kind of a different experience with the Halcyon, the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser coming online in the spring of 2022. Obviously, some of the stuff we talked about is speculation on our part, but I think the one thing that we can all agree is that we like seeing Disney kind of take these chances and do something completely different. And if you're a Star Wars fan, this really sounds like a once-in-a-lifetime, just amazing experience. If you'd like to find out more about this amazing experience, you can go over to the Walt Disney World Park site and navigate from there to the Galactic Star Cruiser, and they will update you on all the latest information as to when it will start sailing, pricing, and some of the experiences that you can expect. Well, I hope you enjoyed this bonus episode, and we want to give a huge shout out to our Patreon supporters who help support us each and every week. If you'd like to be part of that program, you can go over to patreon.com/DCL podcast, and you can find out all the information there. And if you're interested in sailing with Disney Cruise Line and experiencing a Star Wars DHC, they do have some planned for 2022. You can navigate over to DisneyCruise.com and you can find out all the information there. Once again, on the Disney Fantasy, they'll be offering Star Wars DHC on both 7-night Eastern and Western Caribbean sailings. Well, between now and our next show, if you and your family are heading out on a vacation, heading down to Walt Disney World, heading out on a Disney cruise, on behalf of myself, Steve, Christy, and Chris, all of us here at the DCL Podcast, we want to wish you be well, enjoy the time you have with each other, especially in these moments where we get to vacation together, and we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast.
The DCL Podcast is not affiliated with the Disney Cruise Line, Walt Disney Company, Adventures by Disney, or Run Disney. All of the opinions expressed on our shows are those of the hosts and the guests who appear on the show. If you have any questions about any of these products, please contact the Walt Disney Company.